I'm delighted to welcome you to this module, Understanding Education. The module, Understanding Education, is designed to provide you with a comprehensive introduction to the field of education through a combination of using theory to explore and also the practical application, so we consider how it can be applied. We're looking at different concepts, theories and practices that shape educational landscape. Throughout this module, you'll engage in various learning activities, including seminars, group discussion, case studies and practical exercises. You'll be encouraged to think, reflect on your own educational experiences and apply your learning to real-world educational contexts. By the end of this module, I hope that you have started to develop a strong foundation in understanding education, enabling you to understand the educational theories, practices and begin to consider your role as a future educator or professional working in the field of education. Each week we'll have a pre-session activity, which is likely to be a video for you to watch, and some readings. We'll have a face-to-face session, which will be 2 till 4 p.m. on a Monday in room TS 312, and then you'll always be given a post-lesson activity for you to focus on. Our first week will start off with a brief introduction to education, a broad overview of the field of education, explore its history, purpose and key concepts. This might run onto week 2. We then start to look in more detail at educational philosophies. We then move on to learning theories, curriculum development. We then go on to look at towards the end of October, classroom management, exploring strategies for creating a positive and effective learning environment. We will then have tutorials. We'll then start to look at SEND education and inclusive education. We'll look at social cultural factors that impact education. And then finally we start to look at educational policies and reforms and how these impact what happens in classrooms right now. And we'll start to look at how technology is impacting positively and negatively education and what this might mean in the future. Weeks 11 and 12, academic weeks, so that'll be Monday the 4th of December and Monday the 11th of December, will be the weeks where you do your assessments. Just to briefly cover what your assessment will be, and this will be available later for you on the Soul Learning site. It will be a small presentation in groups, likely to be in 2s or 3s this year. You will complete a formal presentation on a chosen challenge that schools face in this current year. Each group will present during the assessment period and you'll offer possible solutions to your challenge. Within your presentation, you must first start by defining education, which can be challenging in itself, explaining the purpose of education, explaining your own educational philosophy, highlight an educational issue, and you'll also use a case study to support this. It is likely that the case study you use will be your participation in the Ready Readers programme which we'll be undertaking shortly. It is essential that you use appropriate evidence to support your comments, such as textbook and peer-reviewed journals, as well as your own first-hand reflections. You must include a reference list and a list of references at the end of your presentations. We will revisit this once again. This week, as I've already stated, we'll cover a brief overview of the field of education, look at its history, the different purposes of education and the conflicts that might arise around this, and we'll start to explore some of the key concepts. And we'll discuss, which I look forward to doing, what we consider as the most important role of the school. We're now going to look at the development of educational study courses, for example, the BA in education that you're studying yourself and why they were created. In the past, education studies or educational studies has been seen very much as teacher training, but this has begun to change. The study was invented in the main during a period of growth after the Second World War, where there was a demand for high quality teachers. So after the Second World War, Britain emerged victorious, and under the Labour Party, under Clement Attlee, they came to power and created a comprehensive welfare state with the establishment of the NHS, giving free healthcare to all British citizens, and other reforms and benefits to support people. Arguably, these have been eroded over time, and something I'm sure we'll return to in discussions within our classroom sessions. Also, the period had low interest rates, low unemployment, and rapid economic growth, and tolerance for higher taxation all played a role in being able to invest significantly into education. World War II had been extraordinarily costly for Britain and the Empire, a term which we may or may not be uncomfortable with, and the country was exhausted and devastated. The aerial bombardment had destroyed many of Britain's cities, and were major shortages of goods and labour also during this period. So it was a period of difficulty and uncertainty, but arguably was a period of positivity as things began to return to a more normal state and no longer in war. During this period of demand, courses at colleges of education were lengthened, and there was much investment in the development of teachers. There was the creation of Bachelor of Education, BEd degrees. During this period, the courses were mainly consisted of specific areas, which were sociology, psychology, philosophy, and the history of education as foundation disciplines. So that was the main areas. Now, if I ask you to think about, what problems could we have with that, then areas that you might mention would be that there was limited specific subject knowledge, always an interesting area of how much this is taught or not taught in educational programs. Also, there was a lack of classroom management or behaviour management areas within these degrees. The 1970s and 1980s was a radical period for education, with much educational reform happening. During this period, the national curriculum was first muted and then implemented in 1988, where the curriculum was founded. Not all subjects started at this time. During this period of the 70s and 80s, teacher education fell into disrepute and was much criticised for largely ignoring the practical nature of teaching while focusing on progressive ideologies. So it's important to understand what ideology means, because this term is something we refer back to on many occasions. So ideology is the values and beliefs that an individual or group might have, especially one which is made up of different bases of economical or political theory. For example, you may or may not believe in the benefits of having a welfare system that supports individuals, or you might believe in everyone having a universal basic income. Not everyone will agree with this. You might believe in capitalism, or you might believe in socialism. Now, I appreciate I am jumping backwards and forwards here, but if we return to that period of time after the Second World War, when many countries were repaying war effort costs and were undertaking many large reconstructions of inner cities, even cities like Southampton, where we're based right now. Recovery was a long, harsh road and was going to take a lot more than economy for the country and countries around the world to flourish. So as I just stated, we needed more than just the economy to flourish and prosper once again. An idea that led towards the investment of education was really important. During this time, it was believed that we need to educate people to certain roles within society, and the Education Reform Act of 1944, the Butler Act, was created. This was the first Education Act since the 1870s Forster's Education Act that planted the seed of education during childhood and schooling. During this period, a system of education was created which was a certain ideological belief, which would translate into a tripartite system of grammar, technical and secondary schools, which now we're going to go on to explore further. Before 1944, the school leaving age was 14, which was later increased to 15, and since then has been increased even further. State schools were under local education authorities, known as LEAs. Schools were single-sex and had a gendered curriculum. Grammar schools were fee-paying, but scholarships were available. If we look at the photos here, maybe a little bit different to see. Schooling looks a little different from one of the classrooms you might have experienced yourself. The Butler Education Act of 1944 brought in the tripartite system of 3 parts, where we had 3 grammar schools for the most gifted academically, often referred to in this period of time as bright. I use that term carefully, as we probably be in agreement that might not be the most appropriate term. Then we had other schools where children who didn't achieve the grammar school status would go to technical schools for the skilled or artistic, and then everyone else would go to a secondary modern. During this period, there was said to be equal opportunity for all because they had entry to a school was based on their 11 plus results, their IQ tests, and schools were seen to have parity of esteem. How in reality, that was often seen differently from different individuals. Now, as you can imagine, there were some problems of this hierarchical tripartite system. Grammar schools were dominated often by middle class children. Working class children's self-esteem could be negatively impacted, often perceived themselves to be failures. IQ tests during this period of time were arguably culturally biased in favour of white middle class children. So let's have a look at an example of how these tests might not be fair for everyone. Okay, so let's move on. So this is an example of an IQ test question that was asked during this period of time. So the question which appeared was, which of the following is the odd man out? Which of the following is the odd man out? Is it Shakespeare? Is it Blake? Or is it Dickens? Okay. So the answer to this question is Dickens. And the reason being he's the odd one out is the only one who did not publish poetry. So if we look at how that question is written there, it is arguably sexist and is also arguably ethnocentric. And what I mean by that is if you're of a certain class, you might have a better understanding of some of these topics. For example, poetry and who writes this. Okay. So there are various other problems with the tripartite system. There was not enough technical skills that were built. The system was unfair to girls. 1, because too few girls got places in grammar schools. By the middle of the century, the 1950s, it was suggested that the system was failing and wasting talent. Also, there was increasing evidence that the class and gender issues were present within the system. This meant that the children that were bright and from working class families were failing the 11 plus selection because of the bias way that it was set up. This led to the introduction of the comprehensive system of schooling. Now there are many different types of school within England. For example, there are now faith schools that offer an education based on one particular religion. In the UK, they must teach at least the national curriculum, but they can choose whatever religious studies they teach and focus on that more predominantly. Then we have academy schools. The main difference to an academy school is they receive their funding directly from central government rather than local authority, and they have more flexibility in how they wish to spend that money. for example, how they pay their teachers. They also have the ability to deviate from the length of the school day and change school term dates, but largely, from the day-to-day logistics in the classroom, are very similar. Free schools are technically just another type of academy, and I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that. Both with academies and free schools, they do not need to necessarily follow the national curriculum, but the vast majority of schools tend to. City technology colleges tend to focus on the same curriculum, but also the pupils will choose more vocational type qualifications for their GCSEs. Some of these schools tend to only focus on Key Stage 4, so pupils will move there after finishing Key Stage 3. Then we have the different varieties of private education and independent education. Some of the conflicting terms can be confusing. Again, in independent schools they do not need to follow the national curriculum, and usually there is a fee to pay from the parents or the guardians. They can set their own teaching pay and conditions. Also, we have an increased variety of special schools throughout the country, but it's important to note that we don't have enough of those to meet the demand that is currently required in the UK. Okay, so what I want to do now is just a quick recap of what we've covered in this short video. So, we have talked about the logistics of your class and when that would be. It's important to constantly check the SOL page to see if there are any changes to what is happening. We've also talked about, crucially, how you are assessed for this module. There is only one assessment, which we will do a practice for it where you'll receive feedback, which will be a formal presentation of a chosen challenge that the school faces, where you must define education, the purpose, and your own educational philosophy, highlighting an issue, and possibly discussing the ready readers. We've also talked about the setup of the teaching and how it is important you do your pre-task and post-tasks. We've also covered a broad overview of the history of education, and we're going to cover that much more in our face-to-face session. We've also talked about some of the key concepts, such as local education authorities and the national curriculum. And these are often converted into acronyms, so it's important you start to slowly learn these. We're going to discuss what the purpose of education, and I'll look forward to discussing that with you further.